Sometimes the smallest act of kindness is the only thing standing between an ordinary day and a miracle no one will ever forget. The November wind swept through downtown Chicago with a sharp bite that made people lower their heads and hurry toward warm offices, crowded coffee shops, and waiting trains. But one woman remained seated on an old wooden bench beside the river as though the cold no longer mattered. Her navy sweater looked faded, her blue jeans were worn, and a thin backpack rested beside her feet. Every passing stranger assumed she was simply another person who had fallen through the cracks of the city. Some avoided looking at her. Others glanced for only a second before pretending she was invisible. Claire Montgomery watched every face with quiet patience, hiding behind the appearance of someone who had nothing, wondering whether genuine compassion still existed in a world that often measured people by their clothes instead of their character. This was not a publicity event. There were no cameras, no reporters, no assistants. No one knew that beneath the simple disguise sat one of the wealthiest women in America. She had challenged herself to spend one ordinary day with no privilege, no introductions, and no influence, believing that the truth about people could only be found when they believed no reward was waiting. The hours passed slowly. A businessman walked by while speaking into an expensive phone without slowing his pace. A young couple shared laughter as they carried fresh pastries, but never noticed the lonely figure on the bench. A delivery driver paused for only a heartbeat before apologetically shaking his head and continuing toward his next stop. Claire did not blame any of them, yet each silent moment quietly confirmed how easy it had become for people to overlook someone who appeared to have nothing. As the afternoon lights softened into gold, Ethan Walker finished another exhausting day at his struggling neighborhood garage. His hands still carried the scent of motor oil despite washing them twice before locking the shop. Business had been slow again. Bills were waiting. The bank had already sent another reminder that payment was overdue. Even so, when his 8-year-old daughter Lily skipped beside him, smiling as though the entire city belonged to them, the weight on his shoulders seemed just a little lighter. They stopped at a small deli where Ethan counted every dollar in his wallet before ordering one turkey sandwich, one bowl of soup, and 2 paper cups of water. It was all he could comfortably afford until the next repair job came through. Lily accepted the simple meal with gratitude that made Ethan smile despite everything. They carried the warm paper bag toward the riverside park, searching for their favorite bench, when Lily suddenly slowed her steps. She looked across the walkway and quietly tugged on her father's sleeve. Ethan followed her gaze and noticed the lonely woman sitting by herself with empty hands, staring toward the river as daylight slowly faded. He looked down at the paper bag, then back at the stranger, and for several silent seconds the cold November breeze seemed to disappear while one impossible decision waited between hunger and humanity. Ethan remained silent long enough for Lily to understand that her father was wrestling with a decision much heavier than the paper bag in his hand. She looked at the warm sandwich, then at the lonely woman across the walkway, and finally back at him with the innocent certainty that only a child could possess. "Dad?" she whispered softly. "She looks even hungrier than we are." Ethan let out a slow breath and smiled with quiet sadness. "I know," he answered. "I was just hoping there might be another way." There was not. The garage had only enough work to keep the lights on for another week if he was careful. 3 customers had promised to return with payment, but had not shown up. The rent on the small apartment was due in 5 days. His aging pickup truck needed new brakes that he could not yet afford. Every dollar carried the weight of tomorrow, and every choice seemed to ask him to sacrifice something important. Yet none of those worries had ever changed the lesson he wanted Lily to remember for the rest of her life. He believed that character was revealed most clearly when kindness required something valuable in return. He knelt beside his daughter until they were eye level. "What do you think we should do?" he asked gently. Lily looked toward the woman again. "We can be hungry for one night," she said. "Maybe she has been hungry much longer." Ethan felt his heart tighten with both pride and humility. There were moments when he wondered whether he was giving Lily enough in life. But then she spoke with a wisdom that reminded him love often taught lessons money never could. They crossed the park together at an unhurried pace. Claire noticed them approaching but kept her eyes lowered, expecting another polite smile before they continued walking like everyone else had. Instead, Ethan stopped a few feet away. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said with quiet respect. Claire slowly looked up, surprised by the warmth in his voice. My daughter and I were about to eat dinner, but we think you might need it more than we do today. For a moment she could not answer. She had prepared herself for indifference, uncomfortable conversations, even rejection, but not for this simple act offered without hesitation or expectation. Ethan placed the paper bag gently beside her on the bench. It is not much, he admitted with an apologetic smile. But it is warm, and I hope it helps. Claire looked from the bag to the father, and then to the little girl whose bright eyes carried only kindness. I cannot take your dinner, she said softly. Ethan shook his head. You are not taking it, he replied. We are sharing what we have, and today that just happens to be all of it. Lily reached into the pocket of her small jacket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper with a colorful drawing she had made earlier that afternoon, and placed it beside the meal. Sometimes pictures help people smile, she said shyly. Claire accepted the drawing with trembling hands as the evening breeze carried the scent of fresh soup through the cooling air. Around them, strangers continued walking without realizing that on one quiet bench beside the Chicago River, 3 ordinary people had just shared a moment that none of them would ever forget. Claire stared at the warm paper bag for several long seconds, as though it contained something far more valuable than a simple dinner. The aroma of fresh soup drifted upward while the folded drawing rested gently beneath her fingers. She slowly unfolded the page and found a colorful picture of a smiling family sitting beneath a bright blue sky. 3 simple figures held hands beside a tree, and above them Lily had carefully written, "Everyone deserves kindness." Claire swallowed hard as emotion quietly settled over her heart. She had spent years sitting across polished conference tables where billion-dollar decisions were made in minutes. Yet nothing in those boardrooms had ever felt as significant as the gift now resting in her lap. Ethan noticed her silence and offered a reassuring smile. My daughter likes drawing for people, he said softly. She believes pictures can remind us that tomorrow might be better than today. Claire looked at Lily, whose hopeful smile carried no trace of pride or expectation. Thank you, Claire whispered. This means more than you know. Lily nodded happily. Then keep it forever. Ethan gently placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder before glancing toward the darkening sky. We should let you enjoy your dinner while it is still warm, he said kindly. Claire instinctively reached toward the paper bag, then hesitated once more. I still feel guilty taking this from you, Ethan answered with quiet confidence. If we walk away worrying about what we lost, then we missed the reason for giving in the first place. Those words lingered in the cold evening air. Claire watched as father and daughter slowly walked away together, their empty hands swinging naturally while they talked about ordinary things as though they had sacrificed nothing at all. Lily pointed excitedly toward the city lights beginning to glow across the river, and Ethan laughed at something she said, a warm sound that seemed almost impossible after everything he had quietly surrendered. Claire remained seated long after they disappeared around the winding park path. She finally opened the paper bag and carefully separated the sandwich before tasting the first bite. It was simple, fresh, and prepared without luxury, yet she had never experienced a meal that carried such profound meaning. Every bite reminded her that someone with almost nothing had willingly placed another person's need above his own comfort. As evening settled across Chicago, Claire carefully folded Lily's drawing and placed it safely inside her backpack before finishing the last spoonful of soup. She rose slowly from the bench and looked once more toward the direction Ethan and Lily had gone. Her social experiment had already answered the question that had brought her there, but another question had quietly taken its place. Who was this man who could choose generosity when life had given him so little in return? She walked toward a waiting black sedan parked discreetly several blocks away, where her longtime driver stepped out and respectfully opened the rear door without asking a single question. Claire slipped into the back seat, still holding the drawing in both hands. After a long silence, she looked out the window at the lights reflecting across the river and finally spoke in a calm voice filled with quiet conviction. Tomorrow morning, she said, I want to know everything about Ethan Walker. Not because he shared his dinner with me, but because I believe that kind of character does not begin with one meal. It begins with a life. The driver nodded silently as the car eased into traffic, carrying Claire away from the park while the small drawing rested safely against her heart, already becoming the most valuable possession she had carried in years. The following morning arrived with clear skies and crisp autumn air as Ethan unlocked the doors of his small neighborhood garage before sunrise, just as he had done nearly every weekday for the past 12 years. He switched on the aging lights, rolled up the metal service door, and quietly thanked God for another day of honest work, even though there were only 2 appointments written on the old calendar hanging beside the office window. Lily hugged him before walking into school with a bright smile, reminding him to have a wonderful day because, in her words, wonderful days sometimes arrived without warning. Ethan laughed softly and promised he would pick her up that afternoon. Several miles away, Claire entered the executive headquarters of Montgomery Holdings wearing an elegant cream-colored business suit, her confident stride immediately recognized by employees who greeted her with respect. Yet instead of heading directly into the board meeting already waiting for her, she carried Lily's folded drawing into the conference room and placed it quietly in the center of the polished walnut table. The executives exchanged puzzled glances but remained silent. Claire looked around the room before speaking in a calm voice. "Yesterday, I met someone who reminded me why this company was created in the first place." She paused for a moment before continuing. "I want a complete background report on a man named Ethan Walker. I am not interested in finding reasons to reward him. I want to know whether the kindness I witnessed was genuine or simply an extraordinary moment." No one questioned her request. By early afternoon, a confidential report rested on Claire's desk. She opened it slowly, expecting to discover a carefully polished public image. Instead, she found a life that almost no one had noticed. Ethan had been widowed several years earlier after his wife passed away following a long illness. Since then, he had raised Lily alone while keeping his modest repair shop alive through determination rather than profit. Financial records showed that his business barely broke even. Loan applications had been denied because the garage generated too little revenue. Utility payments were always made, although often at the last possible moment. Claire continued reading. Several customers had voluntarily submitted letters praising Ethan for charging less than quoted whenever repairs turned out to be simpler than expected. One elderly veteran wrote that Ethan had repaired his truck without charging labor after learning the man lived on a fixed retirement income. Another customer described how Ethan stayed 2 extra hours after closing so a young nurse could safely drive to work the following morning. None of those stories appeared on social media. None had been used for advertising. There were no interviews, no recognition, and no publicity. Claire leaned back in her chair and quietly folded her hands. "Character leaves footprints," she whispered to herself. Even so, she was not ready to reach a final conclusion. Reports could describe actions, but they could never fully explain the heart behind them. She wanted to see Ethan in ordinary moments, when no one imagined they were being observed and no reward seemed possible. Looking once more at Lily's colorful drawing resting beside the report, Claire made her decision. She would return without announcing herself, wearing the same simple clothes as before, allowing life to unfold naturally. If Ethan treated strangers with the same grace he had shown in the park, then she would know that his kindness was not an exception. It was simply the way he chose to live every single day, whether the world noticed or not. 3 mornings later, the city moved with its usual restless rhythm, but Claire chose to slow down once again. Wearing the same simple navy sweater, blue jeans, and comfortable walking shoes, she parked several blocks away from Ethan's garage and approached on foot, determined to become just another ordinary customer. She kept her distance at first, watching through the open service bay as Ethan greeted each person with the same warm smile, whether they drove an aging sedan or a newer truck. There was nothing rehearsed about him. His kindness appeared as natural as breathing. A young college student arrived looking embarrassed after explaining that strange noises were coming from her car and that she could not afford an expensive repair because tuition payments had emptied her savings. Ethan listened carefully, inspected the vehicle, and discovered that a loose heat shield had caused the sound. The repair required only a few minutes and a single bolt from a small container already sitting on his workbench. When the grateful student reached for her wallet, Ethan gently shook his head. "Save your money for your education," he said with an encouraging smile. "Just promise me you will keep the next oil change on schedule." The young woman thanked him repeatedly before driving away with visible relief. Claire quietly watched from across the street, surprised that he had never glanced around to see whether anyone had noticed. A short time later, an elderly man slowly pulled into the garage, driving an old pickup that had clearly served its owner for decades. Ethan recognized him immediately and walked over before the engine was even turned off. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," he called cheerfully. "How are you feeling today?" The older gentleman admitted that climbing underneath the truck was becoming difficult because of his aching knees. Ethan completed the inspection, replaced a worn battery terminal, checked the tire pressure, and cleaned the windshield without mentioning any additional charge. When Mr. Harris insisted on paying more, Ethan smiled and replied, "You served this country for many years. Today it is my turn to serve you." The elderly veteran quietly removed his cap in gratitude before driving away. Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. She had expected generosity, but what she witnessed carried something even deeper. Ethan treated every person with genuine respect, never making anyone feel indebted or embarrassed. Near lunchtime, a delivery driver hurried into the garage looking anxious because a loose belt under the hood threatened to delay dozens of scheduled deliveries. Ethan glanced at the clock, knowing he already had customers waiting, yet he calmly explained the situation to those already in line. Instead of complaining, they nodded with understanding because they trusted him. Within minutes, Ethan replaced the worn belt, tested the engine, and sent the relieved driver back onto the road with nothing more than a firm handshake and a reminder to drive safely. Claire noticed that he accepted only the standard repair charge, even though the customer repeatedly offered extra money for completing the work so quickly. As the afternoon sun settled across the neighborhood, Claire realized she had not witnessed a single extraordinary miracle. She had witnessed something far more powerful. Ethan simply chose kindness again and again in moments so ordinary that most people would never remember them. Yet those quiet decisions were steadily changing the lives of everyone who crossed his path. Standing unnoticed beneath the shade of a maple tree, Claire understood that the answer she had been searching for was no longer hidden inside reports or financial records. It was revealed through countless small choices made when no applause was waiting. And that truth quietly convinced her that the time had finally come to meet Ethan once more. The following afternoon, Claire returned to Ethan's garage one final time, wearing the same simple clothes that had hidden her identity so well in the park. She drove an older gray sedan borrowed from the company's vehicle pool, choosing a car that attracted no attention. As she pulled into the service bay, Ethan looked up from beneath the hood of a family minivan and greeted her with the same friendly smile he offered every customer. "Good afternoon," he said warmly. "What seems to be the problem today?" Claire stepped out of the car and explained that she had noticed a soft squealing sound during the drive across town. Ethan listened carefully, opened the hood, and spent several minutes inspecting the engine compartment before tightening a slightly loose serpentine belt and making a small adjustment that required only a basic wrench. He started the engine again, listened quietly, and smiled with satisfaction when the sound disappeared. Claire reached into her purse and asked how much she owed. Ethan gently closed the hood and shook his head. "Nothing today," he answered. "It was only a simple adjustment. I cannot charge someone for 5 minutes of honest work." Claire looked at him with genuine surprise. "Most places would still hand me a bill." Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe they would, but I want people to come back because they trust me, not because they are afraid of what they might be charged." Before Claire could answer, an anxious delivery driver hurried into the garage and explained that his work van had suddenly begun overheating. He apologized repeatedly because he knew Ethan already had customers waiting. Ethan immediately glanced toward the small waiting area where several people sat reading magazines. Instead of ignoring the driver, he walked over and calmly explained that the van carried medical supplies scheduled for afternoon deliveries. Without a single complaint, every waiting customer agreed that the driver should go first. Ethan thanked them sincerely before rolling the van into the service bay. Claire quietly stepped aside and watched him work with calm efficiency. Within 20 minutes, he discovered a damaged radiator hose, replaced it with an inexpensive part he already had in stock, topped off the coolant, and carefully tested the engine until everything operated normally again. When the grateful driver offered extra cash for saving his route, Ethan accepted only the regular repair price and returned the additional bills. "Your job helps people who are waiting on those supplies," he said with a smile. "That is payment enough for today." The driver left, shaking Ethan's hand with heartfelt gratitude. Claire stood silently for several moments after the garage became quiet again. She had searched for hidden motives, but every answer pointed in the same direction. Ethan did not measure people by appearance, income, or status. He simply noticed their need and responded with quiet dignity. As she prepared to leave, she turned back toward him with a thoughtful expression. "You have been very kind to me twice now," she said. "May I repay your generosity with dinner tomorrow evening? I would like to thank you properly." Ethan looked slightly surprised before smiling politely. "That is generous, but there is really no need." Claire answered gently, "Please allow me the opportunity. Sometimes gratitude deserves more than a simple thank you." Ethan considered her request for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Lily will be happy to come too if you do not mind." Claire's smile became warmer than ever before. "I would be honored to have both of you there." As she drove away beneath the golden light of the late afternoon sun, she knew the next conversation would change all three of their lives, but not because of money. It would begin with the truth, and it would begin with the quiet dignity that had inspired it from the very first moment. The following evening, Ethan and Lily arrived at the address Claire had provided, expecting a quiet neighborhood restaurant where three ordinary people could share a simple meal. Instead, the navigation led them to the entrance of one of Chicago's most elegant private dining clubs overlooking the river. Ethan slowed his pickup truck and looked at the building with visible confusion. "I think the map sent us to the wrong place," he said quietly. Lily studied the glowing entrance and smiled. "Maybe this is where she wanted to meet us." Before Ethan could decide whether to drive away, a polite valet approached with a warm smile and greeted him by name. That surprised him even more. "Good evening, Mr. Walker. Miss Claire is expecting you." Ethan exchanged a puzzled glance with Lily but thanked the valet and followed him inside. The lobby was calm rather than extravagant, filled with soft piano music, warm lighting, and tall windows overlooking the shimmering river. Claire stood near the private dining room entrance wearing an elegant cream-colored dress, her blonde hair neatly styled, looking very different from the woman they had met in the park and the customer who had visited the garage. Lily recognized her first and ran forward with an excited smile. "You look beautiful," she said sincerely. Claire knelt to Lily's height and smiled warmly. "Thank you. I wanted tonight to be special." Ethan noticed the confidence in Claire's posture and the respectful way every employee greeted her, yet he remained his calm and humble self. After they were seated, dinner began with easy conversation about Lily's school, Ethan's garage, and Claire's interest in community projects. The atmosphere felt relaxed, but Claire's expression gradually became more thoughtful. Finally, she placed her napkin beside her plate and reached into a leather portfolio resting next to her chair. She carefully removed Lily's folded drawing and placed it in the center of the table. Ethan immediately recognized it, and Lily's eyes widened with delight. "You really kept it," Lily whispered. Claire nodded gently. "I promised I would." She paused for several quiet seconds before continuing. "There is something important I have not told you." The room seemed to grow perfectly still. Claire looked directly at Ethan with complete honesty. "The woman you met in the park was real, but the story you saw was not. My name is Claire Montgomery, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of Montgomery Holdings." Ethan blinked once, then looked toward the large windows where the company logo was subtly displayed on a nearby building across the river. Suddenly, every respectful greeting, every familiar face, and every unexpected detail quietly fell into place. Lily looked at her father with astonishment before turning back toward Claire. No one spoke for several moments. The silence carried far more meaning than surprise alone. Claire finally continued in a calm voice. "I spent one day living as though I had nothing because I wanted to discover whether people still chose kindness when they believed there was nothing to gain. Hundreds walked past me. You did not." Ethan listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful rather than overwhelmed. When Claire finished, he offered the same gentle smile she had first seen beside the river. "I understand now," he said softly. "But the truth is that I never shared my dinner with a successful businesswoman. I shared it with someone who looked hungry and alone. If I had known who you were, the decision would have meant less, not more." Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment as those simple words settled deeply into her heart. And once again the quiet dignity of the man sitting across from her filled the room with a silence that no amount of wealth could ever purchase. Claire allowed the silence to linger because she knew some truths deserved room to breathe before another word was spoken. The candles flickered gently across the polished table while the lights of Chicago shimmered beyond the tall windows, reflecting across the river like scattered stars. Finally, she reached for a neatly organized folder resting beside her chair and slid it toward Ethan without urgency. "I would like you to look through these whenever you feel ready," she said softly. Ethan opened the folder with quiet curiosity. The first page outlined a proposal to eliminate every outstanding debt connected to his garage. The second described a long-term investment that would modernize the shop with new equipment, updated service bays, and employee training, while allowing Ethan to remain the owner. The third established a fully funded education account for Lily, covering every stage of her education through college should she choose that path. Ethan slowly closed the folder without signing a single page. Claire watched him carefully, expecting questions about numbers or conditions, but instead he folded his hands together and looked out toward the river for a brief moment. "This is more generosity than my family has ever imagined," he said honestly. "Thank you." Claire smiled with relief. "Then you will accept?" Ethan looked back at her with the same calm expression she had first seen on the park bench. "May I ask one favor before I answer?" Claire nodded immediately. "Anything." Ethan spoke gently, choosing every word with care. "Please do not let my story become the only one that matters. There are parents all over this city working just as hard as I am. There are mechanics, teachers, nurses, waitresses, delivery drivers, and grandparents quietly carrying burdens that no one else sees. If you truly want to honor what happened that afternoon, promise me that your kindness will not stop with my family." Claire felt emotion rise in her chest once again. During years of negotiations, she had heard countless requests for larger contracts, higher salaries, and greater opportunities, yet never had someone answered extraordinary generosity by asking for strangers to be remembered first. Lily reached across the table and gently placed her small hand on Claire's. "My dad says blessings grow bigger when people keep sharing them." Claire looked at the little girl, then back at Ethan, and realized that the greatest lesson of the evening had not come from financial success or business leadership. It had come from a father who quietly lived the values he hoped his daughter would one day carry into the world. Claire nodded with quiet conviction. "You have my word," she replied. "Tomorrow morning my foundation will begin expanding our community assistance program. More families will receive emergency support, more small businesses will have access to fair loans, and more children will have educational opportunities. Your kindness will not end with this table." Ethan smiled gratefully before opening the folder once more. "In that case," he said softly, "I will accept your help with gratitude, not because it changes who we are, but because it gives us the chance to keep helping others too." Claire reached across the table, and they shook hands with quiet respect rather than celebration. No photographers waited outside the room. No reporters captured the moment. There were only 3 people sharing dinner beside the river, united by a simple truth that had become impossible to ignore. Wealth could build buildings, create companies, and solve many practical problems, but quiet dignity had built something even stronger that evening. It had built trust, restored hope, and reminded every heart at the table that the greatest investments always began with compassion freely given. Over the following months, change arrived quietly, almost the same way kindness had first entered the story on a chilly afternoon beside the river. Ethan never replaced the heart of his little garage, even as new equipment, brighter lighting, and additional service bays gradually transformed the building into one of the most trusted repair shops in the neighborhood. The old coffee maker remained in the waiting room because longtime customers insisted it reminded them that some things should never change. The handwritten calendar was replaced with a computer scheduling system, yet Ethan still greeted every customer by name whenever he could. He trained 2 young mechanics who had struggled to find steady work, reminding them that honesty was the most valuable tool they would ever own. "A repaired reputation lasts longer than a repaired engine," he often said with a quiet smile. Those words slowly became part of the garage itself. Lily flourished as well. She continued filling notebooks with colorful drawings, but now many of them decorated the walls of the community center supported by Claire's expanding foundation. Whenever children visited after school, Lily happily shared crayons and paper, encouraging them to draw hope instead of fear. She never spoke about wealth or business. She simply remembered that one picture had once comforted someone who needed it. Claire visited from time to time without an announcement, sometimes wearing elegant business clothes and sometimes returning in the same simple navy sweater she had worn on that unforgettable afternoon. Each visit reminded her that success was not measured by the height of an office building or the size of an investment portfolio. It was measured by the number of lives quietly lifted without demanding recognition in return. True to her promise, the foundation expanded emergency assistance for struggling families, created fair financing opportunities for small businesses, and established scholarships for children whose dreams had once seemed beyond reach. Every new program carried the same guiding principle written inside the first planning document: dignity before charity, opportunity before applause. One afternoon, Claire stopped by the garage with no cameras, no executives, and no formal schedule. Ethan was helping a young mother understand a repair estimate while Lily sat nearby, finishing another drawing. After the customer left smiling with relief, Claire noticed a familiar picture resting on Ethan's desk. It was a carefully framed copy of Lily's original drawing, recreated together one rainy weekend after the first had found its permanent home in Claire's office. Beside it rested a simple handwritten note that read, "Kindness grows when it is shared." Claire stood quietly for several moments before anyone spoke. No grand speech seemed necessary. No celebration could improve what already existed. The garage echoed with the ordinary sounds of honest work. Children laughed outside on the sidewalk, and sunlight streamed through the open service door. Ethan finally looked up from his workbench and smiled the same gentle smile that had first greeted a lonely stranger in the park. Claire returned the smile with grateful eyes, understanding that the greatest miracle had never been the investment, the business success, or the financial security that followed. The true miracle was that one ordinary father had refused to let hardship change the way he treated another human being. His quiet dignity had inspired compassion, compassion had awakened purpose, and purpose had quietly transformed lives far beyond anything any of them could have imagined. Sometimes the world changes because someone powerful decides to act. Sometimes it changes because a child offers a drawing, a father shares his last meal, and a stranger chooses to remember both forever.